Welcome to the Remington Podcast, where we take a deep dive into all things ammunition. I'm your host, Audrey Mayes, and today I'm sitting down with Head of Centerfire Products, Kris Carson, Ballistics Engineer, Jimmy Lawrence, and Research and Development Engineer, Logan Henry. And we are here to talk about copper. Copper is non-lead, which is it's needed more now, I would say. But I wanted to dive in a little bit to like the history of copper. I know we talked about, before we started recording, we talked about, who really came up with the first copper bullet projectile. And I think, Logan, you had an answer-ish?
I believe it was 1986. So the Barnes X bullet was kind of, I'm not going to say that was your first copper bullet, but it was your first like very popular commercially produced copper bullet. Mm-hmm. So
I think they did a lot of the work on figuring out how to make those in a repeatable fashion too, without having to machine it out of a solid chunk. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of processes that go into making a solid material into a projectile that still opens up.
Yeah. We have some copper offerings here, but first I wanted to ask why are we choosing copper over any other metal that you can make a bullet out of, Kris?
Well, it's affordability, and you got to have something that's workable. So, copper's been around with bullets since we've been using jackets. So, cost is a big factor.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, core locked, like Remington's traditional core locked, is already a copper
jacket, lead core. So this would be a solid projectile. We have a solid bullet, and we have a tip bullet. Tip bullet's going to have a higher ballistic coefficient, a better aerodynamic profile. So that gives a customer an option. Do I want the standard core lock, or do I want to step up to the copper tip bullet? Mm-hmm.
And, we talked a little bit about needs. Why is there a calling for copper now?
I think it's twofold. There's customer preference in some cases. There's a preference of some people that don't want any lead exposure in their meat. If a bullet fragments, you could get pieces here and there. Is there any risk to that? That's, to be debated. But some people just, I don't want that. I want to remove that chance. And then there's some regulatory situations in certain states or federal-owned lands that are dictating, hey, no lead, whether it's bird hunting or big game type hunting. There, no lead can be on the properties. So that's led us and others to present products that give that customer an option. I'm going to this place, or I'm going to this state, or this is how, this is what I want to use. I don't want to have that opportunity to get in trouble by game wardens or just personal preference. So we have core lock copper, which we introduced a while back, and then this year we have the copper tipped, the cute little copper CU from the periodic table T. So CuT, that's where that came from. Mm-hmm. So 9 different SKUs of that this year. We've been able to take it to the field last fall or again this fall to not only just design and punch paper, but we also use the products that we build. So we carry them out from start to finish.
Yeah. And Jimmy, how do copper bullets in general, perform ballistically?
Well, you've got, as we talked about before, all 3 different types of ballistics getting impacted by going to a solid copper projectile. So interior, exterior, and terminal performance. Most of it comes down to like what we talked about on the shot shell pellet, the density. Mm-hmm. So you've got a cross-sectional density, which is your bore diameter and how much the projectile weighs. Compared to lead, you've got what you would consider a fluffier projectile. So you're going to have a different, usually lower ballistic coefficient, and you'll have to take that into consideration when you design the profile. And once you pull the trigger, you're headed down the barrel engraving those riflings. The entire bearing surface of that solid copper shank has to be engraved by those riflings. So you usually are going to see relief cuts or grooves machined into that bearing surface, which again will affect your ballistic coefficient a little bit. mainly when it gets to the target is where we see the big difference in performance. With lead, you can have bonded projectiles and things like that help a lot on weight retention, but copper almost always has 100% weight retention. It takes a lot of work to lose bullet mass off of a solid copper. So going back what Kris was saying about cleanliness of your meat, you're not even going to have fragments of copper like you would with a jacketed lead core. So that's one of the big desirables on the terminal side.
Sure.
And one other little side benefit is when you do get your load worked up, Logan's done a lot of this recently, you'll find the accuracy is not necessarily just lights out better, but usually more repeatable because you've got one solid material with no voids, no jacket wall thickness variation. Any of the process noise is all measurable from the outside of the projectile. So for our jobs, it kind of makes it a little bit more repeatable and dependable.
And how have our copper offerings been performing in development?
They've performed really well. I mean, I'll give an example. 300 Win Mag in the copper tipped is on the loader right now. So I oversaw the development of that. And it's been shooting sub 1 inch off of the loader. So it's been performing very well. One other thing I would add to Kris's comment, I would say there's also another reason why you might want to use a copper bullet is whenever you're shooting larger game too. I mean, it's more desirable to penetrate deeper. Let's say you're shooting an elk or a bear, something like that, and your copper bullet, it's got, obviously you're going to have expansion on the front end of your bullet, but you've got the shank back there that is still solid copper that's going to continue to drive that bullet forward.
Driving momentum.
Yep.
Yeah. Colby Moorhead, he shot a bear with the 7mm Rem Mag CuT, and he loved it. The performance on the bear really nailed it down. So he boasts about it all the time. So that's good to hear that we got more offerings.
Yeah, especially on thicker skin. Bears not so much, but if you get into something like a wild boar, you can really count on the copper getting through like the brisket plate or the thick hide of more dangerous game. Usually if you take a Magnum offering and you use a traditional bullet, if you're not bonded, you're going to lose a lot of energy before you get to the vitals. But like Logan's bringing up, the front of these things turns into what looks like a boat propeller. So you've got tissue damage and then driving momentum behind it to make sure it keeps on trucking. So I've never killed any game with one, but I've shot a lot of gelatin from our previous years working with barns.
And I mean, there's lots of things that we place on our copper projectiles to help them expand more, right? I mean, with CuT, you have the tip, and with core locked copper, it's a hollow point.
Right.
So, what would make one person choose one versus the other? The
expansion rate and the BC. Those are the two things that get affected.
Yeah.
So, in years past, when we were working closely with barns, either helping them load their product or even featuring their product in our boxes, we're talking about 8 years ago. Their two main offerings that I'm more familiar with than these new ones were the tipped TSX, the TTSX, and then the standard TSX. And you could see a little bit of difference in the depth of when they start opening, and then also a little difference on the BC because of that tip. And I imagine it's pretty much the same on these two, right?
Yeah. We think of that when we're deciding on what to use. So, we have baselines of performance that, hey, this bullet has to meet this criteria, and that's what Logan's working on. So we're not just putting bullets in that are copper and they have a tip and we've checked the box. There's goals for everything, whether velocity, accuracy, but also penetration depth.
Ethical shots.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So if the ballistic coefficient is obviously higher in CuT than it is core locked copper. But if I wanted to shoot, long distance, I would choose CuT, right?
So it's going to have a higher BC. Yeah, you got that copper. That tip on the copper that improves your ballistic coefficient, to a degree. But it still becomes down to the operator and capability of the gun and and everything.
That's plugging a larger mid-plot diameter on the hollow point, isn't it?
Yes. Yes,
Because
absolutely.
we don't have to cut that then. I just
Yeah.
made that up.
So I don't think are there any in that? There's nothing in that box, but
No.
if we could show those. But no, it's been good for us. Like I said, we took this out last year. Adam, Hootie Hoo, he did some video when we were in Utah last year of some long distance shots. I know John from R&D. I think he shot his deer roughly at 500 yards.
It was a long way.
Yeah, roughly 500.
I mean,
He videoed that, but the deer I shot was 296. So all decent, stretching it out, shots for copper, and they were all one shot drop type situations. So
You took yours
pleased.
out west, right, for mule deer? Or?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. That was Utah. We're doing a different hunt this year with this. I've got a rider from Field and Stream going. We're going to Texas next month, so I'll be shooting 7 rim mag on that. So not only do we want to just talk about it, build it, put it in catalogs, and send it to riders, we want to use it and back up with what we make.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're all hunters here. So we make products that we want to use ourselves, definitely.
Exactly.
So going back to, both of our offerings here, when am I going to choose core locked copper?
So there are price points too,
Sure.
associated with both products. Do I want to spend for the premium product, or this would be the entry level copper per se? Just like we have core locked and we've got core locked tipped, or premier long range. There's the stair step that also goes along in the copper lineups that we have. So the entry level is core locked copper. We advertise this more for a deer hunting, approach. The CuT product, 9 different SKUs or calibers. Again, it's the tip product. It's a more expensive product. So somebody that's going on that mule deer hunt, okay, I want a bullet with a higher BC, and I know that's considered a premium product as far as performance. So can get it done with either one, but it's just like all the other products we have on the cup and core bullets. There are steps of levels of standard product, premium product.
Right. So if I'm shooting Arkansas buck.
that's how I think of it, Audrey, is if I'm in Arkansas and I don't want to spend a whole lot of money, Arkansas, we're typically going to be 200 yards in. So if I'm 200 yards in, I don't want to spend the extra on the premium product. Maybe I buy core lock copper, but okay, I'm going on a hunt out west. Your average shot, let's say it's going to be 300 yards or more. I want the better BC. I'm going to spend the extra on the premium product.
Well, even beyond that, we're still talking about a price point beyond our standard core lock PSP. So here in Arkansas, if we don't have regulation driving that, there's the personal preference side of things, but you also have the other end of the terminal performance. You've got this envelope, what we normally kind of consider a min velocity to a max velocity. On our shorter shots that we actually have to start thinking about the max velocity on some of these shots that guys will take. They'll shoot a 7 mag because they want to be able to hold it flat for 300 yards, and then they'll take a deer at 50 yards. You won't see quite as much of that just splatter shock on the higher velocity from one of these projectiles because it's got so much more of a controlled expansion.
Gotcha.
I do think that is something worth mentioning, that your lead is soft and it moves and it's designed to move within this min and max velocity, right?
Yes.
That top velocity almost doesn't really exist on a copper. You are almost always going to have the controlled expansion do its job and drive through the other side and create a good temporary and decent permanent wound channel.
Definitely. So,
And that's not even bringing up bones. The bones are the thing we always forget about.
that's true. Quartering 2 shots, quartering away shots. You want to break through those shoulders. Copper is a good choice for that.
Yep, it holds together, and that's why it's preferred in a lot of the big game stuff. Even you've talked about bears and some of the Africa stuff. Those guys are using these types of solids to break through and go deep.
Yeah. Has anyone, I know, Kris, you have you guys shot animals with CuT or copper yet?
Jello.
Jello. That's a
Jello
good
animals.
animal.
Yeah, currently it's on the list of
Jello
getting
animals.
sighted in with my rifle for deer season this year. So
That's exciting. It's exciting.
If I could feed my family with wild gelatin, we would eat year round.
Wild gelatin.
Yeah.
Its natural habitat.
Yep.
Yeah, well, they're both great offerings, and like we were talking about earlier, there's a call for them now. So
Sure.
I'm glad we got to fill that market. and offer people the Remington they love, even though like rules may be changing. We're still Remington.
And the rules fluctuate. You know, there's a big push for this in Europe. I was over there 2 years ago, and you know, Germany, copper is a heavier push than even the cup and core. The customer's been pushed that way. It's not even necessarily a preference. So some of the other countries aren't necessarily as forward or aggressive on the copper, so they have an option. But sometimes, whether it's hunting regulations or whatever regulations, sometimes it starts in Europe and it comes here after.
Sure.
You know, it's kind of the pilot.
Yeah,
place.
to expand on that a little bit, you'll see Germany
California
do something and then California do something. It's almost like your crystal ball. But back when Barnes first started, their popular customer base was over there in the Black Forest, where they were doing all the odds and ends of like the 9.3 and the Mauser loads. Even back then, it was environmental. And now those regulatory bodies are pushing towards the meat cleanliness from a public safety standpoint.
Yeah. And by no means are we trying to say this is what's coming or else kind of thing. You know, we're just, or forecasting that's where Game and Fish or government agencies are going to go. It's just, we want to have that offering for the consumer and not leave out the guys that are required to use it, So, you know, we can't just say, hey, no, we're not going to make products for you. So, it's twofold. But we sell a lot of product in Europe as well. You know, some people don't think, oh, well, Core-Lokt is America only, and that's not true. I mean, there's a lot of hunting in Europe that people don't really picture, but they're doing more than eating cheese and pizza over there.
Yeah, PH has got to eat too. Got to fill the meat pies, you know.
A good parallel would be when we as an industry realized, and we talked about this again on the shot science episode, that the lead was probably not the best idea to be throwing out into the wetlands by the ton. And why wouldn't you have made that change sooner on the rifle side of things? Well, for one, mostly it's on dry terrain and you're using 180 grains at a time instead of an ounce and an eighth. But as the industry did have to start shooting non-lead shot shell products, you saw it move very slowly at first. Again, like Kris says, I don't think the rifle products will ever be 100% push that direction. But people will look at that as a parallel and say, why would you change this and not that? There's a big difference in where the product goes and how much of it there is. So
sure. And like we said before, people choose copper not just because they have to. They like it.
Yeah.
Like Colby.
Yeah, there's definitely pros.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time, guys. Everyone wants to know about copper, so thanks for sharing. There you have it, guys. Remington is on the rise. Like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to share this podcast with your hunting or shooting buddies. If you have any questions for me or the engineers here, you can email us at podcast@remington.com. Thanks for listening.